And I bet on your,
I apologize.
oh, that's okay. I bet on your page, when chapter 2 rolls around, it looks like it's with the shorter lines. Is that true for most of you?
Chapter
Mm-hmm.
Because now it's shifting from prose to poetry, which means it's got the shorter lines. Number 2, there will probably be parallelism in it. And number 3, we could actually play with the intensification of the parallels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read Jonah's prayer as if it's a poem. It's a speech that he makes when he's inside this creature, the fish, I'm going to call it. And in fact, the chapter starts with just a regular prose line. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He said, in my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the depths of the grave, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the deep, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains, I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you brought my life up from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. But I, with a song of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. Salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. Do you see any parallels there that we could grab onto fast?
Sure. The very first, the beginning of chapter 2. I called to the Lord out of my distress. He answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and thou didst hear my voice. For thou didst cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood was, yeah, it's all over the place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're right. And yes, I think if you can just see those, they're operating there.
Mhm.
And again, when I read these poetic sections, and we'll have some fancy professionals reading these things too, I try to emphasize it as again, in this case, as a drama. There's a dramatic situation that's going on here, and we've been told the details in the prose. Now this guy's in the fish, so I want that drama. I'd like to read the whole thing rather than chop it up or just give you a short portion of it and things like that, so that we're explaining the whole thing. Now, so that's our first example. Now, what I'd like you to do, and I'm watching the clock here. Let's see, where are we with time? I can't see it.
27.
Oh, yeah, oh, it's 18:27. That's good. Yes, that's right. Now, what I'd like you to do is to actually spend some time, and I'm going to give us, let's say, 3 minutes to do this, to go through this Hebrew scriptures. You go as fast as you want or slow as you want, and just notice what's in prose, where all of a sudden it might be poetry with the shorter line. Now, you do know that all of the book of Psalms is going to be in this poetic section. 150 of them. So I am not emphasizing very much because we kind of know that they're like songs, like prayers, like a poem of some kind. It has a beginning and an end, and there's some kind of drama going on there. So what I'd like to do is just stop here talking and give you some time to go through the Hebrew section, the Old Testament, page by page if you want, or jump around and notice, and then to choose one thing that is in prose to bring our attention to later. But don't use the psalm because we know those are going to be in this poetic text.
You want us to choose poetry?
Yeah, choose and just, and it could be almost any place, but just spend 3 minutes. And before you start the 3 minutes, I'll just say one of the practices I did when I decided to asked to do this class was I listened to every section that is in poetry. I read as much as I could. I would just go through the book. So I just page by page, and it's just burning in my brain. Oh, Isaiah, it's almost all poetry. Jeremiah's a lot, but not entirely. Oh, I'm noticing this, so that in the future we notice. So I will now stop talking. I guess I have the right to. I guess I have the right to look at the. I'm going to give you 1 more minute to just do your browsing, and then I'm going to have you choose something to draw our attention to it. We won't be reading them because we won't have time, but to draw our attention to something that's in this poetic form.
Remember which books we're reading. Yeah, but I really want Judith. Big hand.
Okay, why don't you make your choice of something you're going to draw our attention to, and then we can quickly share what you have. We won't have time to go find everybody's spot, but you can see one of the things I'm emphasizing is I think it's really useful to literally go through this book page by page, just as a meditative process. Turn the page. shorter lines. Isaiah, oh, now it's Zechariah. There's a lot of short lines there. Obadiah, oh, but Malachi, it's all in prose. Actually, I had to remember some of these things, you know. Oh, this is Deuteronomy and it's all prose. And all of a sudden, there's Moses giving a speech and it's all short lines. Oh. And just do that every day for the rest of your life.
Easy task.
Right, but it's, I would hope it's kind of a meditative thing, that
Mhm.
it's burning into your brain. Okay,
Read some of it too, though.
right, and then at times you say, I'm going to read this. I'm
Yes.
going to read this, you might say. Or maybe read a section, or let's find it. What did you, Linda, give us your choice? And then,
Well, yeah, I thought that was the Song of Moses in Exodus, and that was a good song. And then there's another Song of Moses in Deuteronomy.
32.
Yeah, so. but
Okay,
kind of
very
struck-
good.
Yeah, I struck up that. Then Job, that kind of surprised me that so much of Job.
The whole
was-
thing.
The whole-
Yeah,
No,
Mhm.
Joe,
poor Job.
yes,
Mhm.
but,
It's poetry. Oh
but
my
the-
goodness.
but the whole of
amazing.
Job is written in this form.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's the oldest book in the Bible.
really.
Yeah.
This is a big deal.
And it has a very writing style than many of the others,
Oh,
even within the poetry.
And I'm going to make a confession here. Even if we have time, we might listen to one one section of Job. But I kept away from Job because for me, Job is one of the greatest things ever written in the history of the world. It is so profound as a work of literature that that's from my point of view. I was just kind of keeping my distance from it, as I was doing this. So I don't, but
why do you think it's so profound?
well, let's not talk about that right now. I just,
Oh, okay.
but
Well,
I
you
wanted to
brought
say
it up.
that kind of
You
reason,
brought it up.
reason I'm keeping I'm kind of keeping my distance. There's
Yeah.
a holiness about it on so many different levels that I'm going to
Okay.
just keep watching. So
We could do months just on Job.
Yeah.
It's written both as a poem, but it's also written as like
Mhm.
putting on a trial. It's written
Yeah.
like a trial, and it's written, and it's just even in Hebrew, like the way it's put together, it's incredible.
I get embarrassed when I read it, but the Song of Solomon is almost entirely poetry as well.
well, I think yeah, the Song of Songs or songs, the love songs, erotic songs,
Mhm.
that's poetry. There's a reason. If you're writing a poem of love, it should be, you know, about how beautiful your partner is and how much you see your, I'll go boyfriend in this case, your boyfriend jumping across the crags like a gazelle. Wow, that's nice.
Yeah.
He leaps like a gazelle.
Okay.
He is as strong as
Very
a,
nimble.
he is nimble as a gazelle. Boy, can he leap across the stones. I'm using my own made up.
Yeah.
Okay, Austin, which one did you go?
Well, I contrasted two of them. Hezekiah, well, Solomon's prayer and dedication first, and First Kings, that is all prose. And then Hezekiah's prayer in Second Kings, that is mostly poetry.
Great. So here we're in one of those history books, Kings, and it's information. Most of it's in prose, isn't it? And then you saw Hezekiah's prayer, and one of the kings is going to pray now, and it's sure he's speaking in this poetic way, isn't he? And so thank you, Bill. We'll keep going.
Mine, the poetry part is one of my favorite books, Lamentation. And they get in a rhythm of how bad it is,
Yes.
and they lament. And then the next book is Ezekiel, which starts with prose, with a guy simply describing, now when I was in my 30th year in the 4th month, he places himself in history in Babylonia, in Ezekiel, book of
Yeah.
Ezekiel. Ezekiel wanders off into amazing things that he
Right.
sees,
Yes.
and it might be poetry, but initially
Most of Ezekiel is prose, because here we have Isaiah, the very big book, almost all poetry
Mhm.
in this shorter lines with the repetitions and the parallel. Jeremiah, a lot of prose in there, but a lot of what we call the poetry. And then Ezekiel, most of it is in prose. And then later we're going to see that it's breaking up into those shorter lines for some reason.
Mhm.
And the question I'm going to say before we continue with the other people would be, what difference does it make? And I'm going to, what difference does it make to you? And I'm going to give a list of 4 things, and then 1. There's an intellectual part of this where you're simply learning new information, new idea here, maybe. What difference does that make to you that you're learning that there's parallelism, maybe? Number 2, what difference does it make to you culturally, in this case, artistically, because the poem is a work of art? Does it make a difference to you that it's at all? Does it? You don't have to answer. 3rd, what spiritual difference might it make in the way you live your faith life, your spiritual life, your practice, your way of living in the world, spiritual? And 4th, what theological difference does it make? Does it make any difference to you theologically? So I'm going to that list. The intellect, we're learning new, so you maybe learn a little piece of information. 1/3 of the book. 2, aesthetics, art. I was emphasizing Jonah as a work of art. My model there is like Shakespeare, a drama. He's speaking out of the belly of a whale. Art, beauty. Then spiritual life, does it make a difference to you spiritually? Does it make a difference to me? If you're gonna, I love to talk about this. If somebody wants to know, they should ask me. But if you're not gonna ask me, I'm not gonna say anything. And theologically, does it make any difference to you theologically? So let's hear some more. Eunice, did you?
No, I'm gonna pass.
Okay, and John, you couldn't see the page anyhow.
Wasn't able to read, but
Yes.
as the chapters as they're written, sometimes they begin as prose and then switch to poetry.
Yes.
Is the poetry part a condensed version of what was said? In the
See,
first-
what a wonderful, see, there's John's mind is thinking questions. Well, if I'm doing the Hezekiah business, as Austin was saying, and I've started in prose, just like I was telling the story about the guy in the snowstorm. And King Hezekiah, he was tired one day and he was working so hard, and then he felt bad. Then he said, "Oh Lord, you are so strong. Your might is so great. You can create the world." And John said, "What's happening here with the language? Does it make it, what's happening here? Does it matter?" I guess that's what your real teacher will have to talk about.
Well, you're a real
No,
teacher.
Hannah,
Well, I gravitate towards the songs of women, so I was gonna choose Hannah's song. But I really like Judith's thing, which I know is not in every Bible apocryphal, because it's a whole poem about how mighty she is, which usually you
You
see
like
from
that.
men. Yeah.
now
she
Judith
cuts off
isn't in the
someone's head.
Protestant. Is that written in poetry?
Yes. Well, this
With the broken lines?
her song is, yeah.
There are one section of it.
Well, a couple sections.
Yeah,
A
right.
longer book, but
Right.
yes,
Most of it's prose, and
most
yet
of it's
then it
because
breaks
it's a
into,
story.
like the woman is, like we're gonna see, maybe. we'll
Right
have
at the
time-
very end, when she recounts everything she's done.
Right,
Yeah.
it slips into that poetic form.
Oh,
doesn't it?
definitely, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
okay, right, very good. Let's see, Adam, do you have one?
Sure. But Genesis 9, 25 through about 30, or no, chapter 10. Noah is talking to his sons, and he's really angry at them. He's chewing them out. Curse on Canaan, he'll be a slave to his brothers. Give praise to the Lord, God of Shem. Canaan will be a slave to them. God caused Japheth to increase. And he's saying Canaan will be this slave of Japheth. And I'm imagining a lot of people would have been much happier had whoever written this just said Noah was angry and he yelled at his kids, right, instead of giving the details.
Well, but he's piling it up, isn't he? He's
Yeah.
with the line, but here we are in Genesis, and it's a very short section.
Yeah.
About 5
Very
lines.
short.
Yeah, just
very short, and there Adam picked that up. We've got all this prose in Genesis, just information. I'm not putting the prose down, but it's different. And then all of a sudden there's this Moses thing, and it's
So it's got like, yeah, prayers or singing songs, and like giving a speech.
yeah, giving a speech.
So the style of
Right.
what kind you're trying to present.
The writing style is changed. And then there's a third category, which would be some, like in Isaiah, it doesn't seem like there's a beginning and end. It's more like it's a stream and a flow of this language. Sometimes a Bible now is printed out which says, well, this section in Isaiah is an oracle against Egypt. And it goes on for 20 lines. And then it's like it's trying to help you have a sense that some things start and end, but it's not clear if that's the way it's supposed to be. But the language is just flowing out this way. And there's a reason that Isaiah is so hard to read, is partly because you don't know if something is starting here or ending here, but it's a flow rather than a song. Like what Jonah was saying was definitely, it was like a psalm, actually. It's just so. And we're going to hear somebody read Hannah in just a moment here. Louise, do you have one?
Well, I was cheating. I was going through and just finding everything that's written in poetic style. And not picking out any particular passage, like the different, like Hosea and Amos and Lamentations, and take time to go back to the actual poetry to read that.
Right. But you could see that Hosea is 100%, I think, or Amos is 100% poetry, isn't it?
Yes.
A lot. And Hosea, and then you mentioned Lamentations. Lamentations is 100%. Bill had mentioned Lamentations.
Mhm.
Okay, and that Dale.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you have just an example for us, but that one of them that you found?
Well, not only the passage of Hannah. I mean,
Okay.
That's okay.
Because you're going to read it to us in a moment, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So is Ken participating in this process?
Yes. Now Eli was very old.
Is that prose or?
That's prose.
That's all he got.
I think that's it, probably, yes.
That's a public statement.
Okay, I don't know who else is up there. Camille, you mentioned Song of Songs. I think it's important that love poetry, the erotic poetry of the Song of Songs is pretty much all of this form.
I'm not reading anything from the Song of Songs.
No, but I mean, you mentioned. Hey, are you there someplace?
Yeah.
Did you find something?
She's on mute. You're on mute, Mary.
She hasn't even said anything.
Yes, because mine's already covered. I was looking at Jonah chapter 3, but it's very interesting to read what one has heard before, but with really for an eye for intensification. And then it just jumps out. It's like, oh, and I think maybe it was something that I have felt or been swept up in before, but not thinking so much about it, just rolling with it. So it's nice to have a new idea, Brian. Thank you.
That would be an example of new information. And then you can decide, what difference does it make maybe in your artistic life of taking in the intensity of a poem? And then because the book is a sacred text, does it mean anything to me spiritually? Does it mean anything to my understanding of ultimate reality? God or the divine or the sacred. Okay. There's a person there I don't know.
Carol and Bernie are up there.
Do you have a choice for us?
Okay, well, mine was already chosen too. I latched on to Lamentations, and I think that, I mean, that's 100% poetic, and it totally makes sense to me because, you know, when people are complaining, woe is me, that's totally poetic to me all the time. So fitting,
Right.
quite fitting to be poetic.
Brian,
Yes,
I found a really interesting few verses in Jeremiah, chapter 17, if people want to read that later, chapter 17, verses 5 through 8, because it does an intensification for a few lines and then it reverses and says, you know, cursed is the man, it begins with, and then the last two verses are blessed is the man. And it's very interesting that it demonstrates exactly what you've been talking about. It's great.
well, that's good. I'm relieved. But that would be an
You're correct.
example that parallelism might bolster something, support it,
Yeah.
or it sometimes be it says, you're strong, but those people are weak. These are very good people, but those are wicked. You know, that kind. Is there another person there? Bernie.
Picked Ezekiel chapter 17, verses 22 to 23. Says, I will take the top of a tall cedar and break off a tender sprout. I will plant it on a high mountain, on Israel's highest mountain. It will grow branches and bear seed and become a magnificent cedar. Birds of every kind will live there and find shelter in its shade.
Great, thank you. Now, I think we got everybody, but I want to make sure there's another reading I have that I wanted Dale to do, and I don't want to run out of time because she has another thing. So let's hear another of these poetic prayer speeches, and this is Hannah's prayer in 1 Samuel. So find your 1 Samuel, which is again in the early part of the Tanakh, or the Hebrew scriptures.
After Judges.
Judges.
Yes.
What chapter and verse?
Chapter 2.
It starts right at the
Ah.
beginning of.
Okay.
Second, 1 Samuel, first.
Okay. Yeah, go. I think go. Okay.
And the reason I think it's useful for people to find it, if you can, is just not to follow her language, because you might have a different translation, and why not just listen to the language that's coming through her translation. But by being able to glance at it on the page, you can see, it's got the shorter lines. And right before it was a prose section that looks like a paragraph, solid. And then right at the end of her prayer, she is still in chapter 2, all of a sudden it's back to the prose. But for her, the time that she's speaking her prayer, it's in the shorter lines. And some little background on the story. You know, Hannah is a woman who can't have children or doesn't have any children. And she prays a lot, wants a child, and then she gets pregnant. She's very grateful to God that as the child, she gives birth to a little boy that will be Samuel. And she has decided to turn this baby over to like the temple to be raised in a sacred situation. And then she is going to give her prayer. So let's just pause a moment before Dale is going to present this to us. So whenever you're ready, go ahead, Dale.
Okay. First line of chapter 2 is prose. Hannah also prayed and said, my heart exalts in the Lord. My strength is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. There is none holy like the Lord. There is none beside thee. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by God actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren have borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. God brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. God brings low. God also exalts. God raises up the poor from the dust. God lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them God has set the world. God will guard the feet of the faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a person prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them, God will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. God will give strength to the king and exalt the power of the anointed.
Well, then Elkanah went home to Ramah, but the boy ministered before the Lord under Eli the priest. Well, let's just pause here a moment in silence. We just heard Hannah's prayer of gratitude after she gave birth to Samuel, and he's a little boy now, and she's turning him over to the temple. And she speaks her prayer in this poetic form. And it has, Dale, that was beautifully read. Thank you very, very much. And I know you have to leave soon, but if you have to go, just go anytime, Dale and Kim, thank you. And I'm going to have us do a couple more things. Don't worry, I'm watching the clock so that you can move on with your life. But let's just take the second verse.
We can listen to that.
I was working on the second verse today in Hebrew, just so, because Linda said at a meeting we were at yesterday, we're going to learn some Hebrew. I said, oh, I better come through on something. So look at, well, if you still have it, you look at your second verse, but I'll tell you what it is. The English is, there is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. We've got parallels as it's bringing up that intensification. And I was working on the Hebrew. This is very amateurish, very elementary.
Nobody here is going to know the difference.
You won't be right. You won't know the difference
You will not
anyhow.
know.
So
Except
I'll just make up something. But I'm going to have you say it too. Then, but just listen to me say this part of Ain Kadosh Yahweh Ki Ain Biltecha Ve'ain Tzur Kelohenu. So Ain would be something like no one else, no one like. Kadosh is the Hebrew word for holy. And Ka, Yahweh, as like, in this case, the name for God here is Yahweh. So it's Ayin. No one is holy like you, Yahweh. The second verse then, is a little awkward in the translation from my point of view. No one except you, meaning there's no one like, no one besides you, or no one except you is like this. And then ayin, no one like a rock but you, something like that. The word for rock is tsur. And then in this case, the name for God is Elohim. So it's going to be Kelohenu, Elohim. And in the first line, the name for God is Yahweh. So I'm going to say the first line, and then you repeat. Let's just say it one word at a time. Ayin,
Ayin,
Kadosh,
Kadosh,
Kayahweh.
Yahweh,
So now we'll say it, I'll just say the whole thing. Ayin, Kadosh, Kayahweh. Say that together. Go ahead, if you can remember it. Ayin,
Ayin, Kadosh, Yahweh.
No way.
second line is a little that awkward, but no one besides you, no one except you. Ki,
He,
biltecha.
Biltecha,
That biltecha is except you, beside you, but no one besides you can do this kind of stuff. So I'll say the line. Ki ayin biltecha.
Ayin, Biltecha. Yeah.
And then the third line, va, which is and, va, ayin,
Ayin,
rock, and then kelohenu.
Kelohenu,
So I will say it, va ayin tsur kelohenu.
the Kayin, Kelohenu.
And the word for rock, tsur.
Sure.
Right. So this was the second verse of Hannah's prayer in Samuel. We heard Dale read it all the way through very beautifully as a prayer with the parallelisms, the intensification, and when you looked on the page, it was in the shorter lines. And you'll indulge me, and I'm going to recite that second verse again. Ayin kadosh kayahweh, ki ayin biltecha, v'ayin tsur kelohenu.
That's beautiful.
It's not much the same each time, didn't it?
Really good. It sounded really good.
So now I think it's time. There are all sorts of things I thought we might get to, but I'll wait till we'll come back on the 23rd, whoever wants to come. And we'll hear some of these things read by other kind of readers. I'll have some other information. We'll play a little bit with the acrostic poem, which is a poem in which each line begins with the next letter of the alphabet. Like the first line with A, the second line with B. If I was going to make an acrostic poem, I might say, apples are good for you. B, because they taste so good. C, citrus can be very good too. D, don't forget your banana. E, everything is good for you, you know? So I'm playing with. And somebody mentioned Lamentations. That is all in acrostic. I just learned recently. It's all of those 8 poems in Lamentation the next line will start with the next word in the alphabet. Somebody is shaping
That's
this.
in the Hebrew.
In the Hebrew.
In the Hebrew, right.
Yeah.
Somebody is shaping that, this artist, this poet, this spirit of the writing of it. So I do have a little assignment for you if you do decide to come back, and that is to keep doing the looking through the pages. Just let that just part of your way of looking at this text, and then choose some section of one of these poetic sections and bring it, but read maybe 10 lines, but no more. But don't use the Psalms because it's so obvious that they're in this poetic form. So just look through it and the book as a practice. Say, oh, poetry, what is this? And then the big questions that you might want to think about, or I know you think about, what difference does it make to learn this information? 2, what difference does it make to experience this as an art that is part of your artistic life? Novels, poetry, music, film, dance, poetry. What difference does it make, if any, in my spiritual life? What difference does it make in my understanding theologically? Ultimate reality. God, Yahweh, Elohim, the divine, the sacred, the ultimate reality. Does it? Thank you, everybody. That was fun for me. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
thank you. Nice to see all of you.
How many letters in the alphabet are there in the Jewish?
22.